As the Jaguars kind of start the search for their next head coach, this was the initial list of guys that the team decided they wanted to request interviews with. They also added Brian Flores, the Minnesota Vikings defensive coordinator, to the list this afternoon. So the list kind of growing a little bit more. But here's kind of the list. Let me introduce you to a couple of these guys really quick. Robert Saleh actually coached here in Jacksonville briefly for a while. Most recently, he was the New York Jets head coach. He was relieved of his duties during the season, but with the way the Jets finished the year, it kind of made him look a little bit better, right? Kellen Moore is the offensive coordinator up there in Philadelphia. He's been around the block as a play caller, been kind of considered the offensive whiz kid around the league for a little bit now. Todd Monken doing a fantastic job up there in Baltimore with that offense. Monken has been around football for a long time, really knowledgeable guy. Ben Johnson, we might talk a little bit about him in just a second. He's the offensive whiz kid that every team wants to be their next head coach if they have a vacancy right now. Patrick Graham, a defensive candidate. He was the defensive coordinator for the Las Vegas Raiders. That coaching staff actually has been relieved of their duties. We'll see what's next for Patrick Graham. And as the Jaguars get him in here for an interview, Aaron Glenn, the other coordinator up there in Detroit. He's the defensive coordinator. Actually a one-time Jaguars player. Played for the Jaguars back in 2007. Briefly even got an interception against Tampa Bay. And speaking of Tampa Bay, how about another offensive candidate, Liam Cohen, the offensive coordinator for the Buccaneers, doing a fantastic job there. This is his first year calling the plays for the Bucs and made them a very innovative bunch. And then there's Joe Brady. Joe Brady is the offensive coordinator up there in Buffalo that has kind of got them rolling. This is the group. This is the initial list, including Brian Flores, that the Jaguars are kind of considering for that head coaching opening. Now, I know it's a long list, but overall, let's be serious. Everybody wants the offensive guy, right? So with that in mind, as we talk about the offensive guy, let's take most of the defensive guys off. That leads us to these three guys that are probably the prime candidates on most folks' list. Joe Brady, Ben Johnson, Liam Cohen. So Ben Johnson's in the middle because he is the one that everybody has their eye on. He's the belle of the ball this offseason. He is the most popular coach on the market. Ben Johnson has been the offensive coordinator up there in Detroit, and the Detroit offense has been one of the top ones in the league. The Lions are really rolling, so everybody wants to see if they can get that guy to go to their team and fix their offense. Now, the idea of getting the offensive guy is that maybe he gets the most out of Trevor Lawrence, which is, of course, the key to figuring out the Jaguars, right? So Trevor Lawrence, of course, maybe you can pair him up with Ben Johnson and he figures it out. Maybe he can. Maybe he can bring some of that culture that they have up there in Detroit and get the thing rolling. Same idea goes for Joe Brady, who's done fantastic things up there with Josh Allen in Buffalo, and Liam Cohen has Baker Mayfield playing fantastic in Tampa, and that running game in Tampa Bay, whew, they have been doing it this season. So these three guys are probably the offensive candidates. And I know this is the top of a lot of fans' wish list when they talk about coaches. But the more I kind of think about it, the more I keep going back to what a guy told me in the locker room. Tank Bigsby said this as they were cleaning out the lockers the other day.
We just need our own standard, we just need our own identity, who we are, and build that and hold each other accountable for good, bad, and move on from it and just flush stuff and don't harp on it and go out and play ball what we're here to do, and I feel like that's how we got to approach next year.
And that kept telling me that they need a guy who can set the culture. Not to say that any of the offensive guys couldn't, but as I looked at the list, I said, who's the guy that makes me the most confident that they can reach that standard, set that standard for the Jaguars and help them set a culture for the years to come? And I kept coming back to one guy, Aaron Glenn. Again, I called him the other coordinator up there in Detroit earlier. That's because, well, everybody wants Ben Johnson, but Aaron Glenn's a pretty good coach too, even though he's the defensive guy and nobody wants the defensive coach. So Aaron Glenn is the name I keep coming back to. And again, played for the Jaguars in those sweet uniforms back in the day. Look, Aaron Glenn's a really good football coach. He's got cosigns from Dan Campbell, his head coach, that's saying he'd love to have him back in Detroit, but thinks that guy deserves a football team. It could be here in Jacksonville. Look, I think the Jaguars' biggest need this offseason, while they got to figure out the offense, their biggest need as they figure out this coaching hire is they've got to find a guy who can set a standard. They've got to find a guy who can set a culture and put it in place and say winning is not just the expectation, but it's something that they must achieve. And they got to put the work in to do it. I am the most confident that that guy is the guy who can help do that. I know. I kind of zigged where everybody else is zagging. A lot of folks want the offensive wig kid. I've been in the party before, too. I thought I was going to be a Ben Johnson guy. I still believe in Ben Johnson, but somehow the thought of Aaron Glenn being the Jaguars' next head coach just keeps on growing on me. And it'd be a cool full circle moment going from a player to come back as a head coach one day. I don't know. Look, it's just something that's kind of growing on me. I know a lot of people hear Ben Johnson and they think, maybe he'll bring back Mark Brunell. Who says Aaron Glenn couldn't bring Mark with him too? He's on that staff in Detroit. I don't know. We'll see how it all shakes out. We'll talk more about the Jaguars on the next episode of Teal the Show. We're going to have Frank Frangie in the building for that one. That's coming your way on Friday at 11:20 right here on Channel 4. This is going to be our last episode of Teal the Show for the year. I know it's kind of a sad moment, but we're going to wrap up the season, talk about the head coaching search, and talk a little bit about what's ahead for this offseason. All that's coming your way on the last episode of Teal the Show for the year on Friday at 11:20 right here on Channel 4. If you want more Jaguars coverage, and we'll have you covered all offseason long, check out the News 4 Jags podcast. Justin Barney and I sit down all the time to talk Jags, and we will keep you up to date throughout the coaching search. You can track down that News 4 Jags podcast anywhere that you get your podcasts, or just head over to news4jags.com, click on that handy dandy sports page.